Welcome to Let's Talk Climate. I'm Rebecca Rear, Director of the Climate for Health program at ecoAmerica. And while we're all tuning in virtually, I am co-hosting this episode with the Planetary Health Alliance from just outside of Washington, D.C. on lands shepherded by the Nacotchtank and Piscataway people. I am looking forward to today's topic, from global to local. What does planetary health mean for me? With our guest, Marie Studer, Senior Program Manager at the Planetary Health Alliance. Hi, Marie.
Hey, Rebecca. Thank you for having us.
And Melody Wu, who is a senior at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a Planetary Health Campus Ambassador. Thanks for being here today. Hi, Melody.
Hello.
So let's start off our discussion with the question. The planetary health and climate solution fields have been really busy lately, and the health sector is stepping up to meet the challenge. We've had big announcements like decarbonizing the healthcare sector from 50 different countries at COP, the Global Climate Conference. We had the Lancet Countdown report release and the Sao Paulo Declaration. So what's been a recent highlight for you that centers climate and planetary health action? So Marie, why don't we start with you?
Thanks so much. And Rebecca, thank you again for having us. We're delighted to be here and as partner organizations. So it has been a really exciting and dynamic year and so on. But even just in the last 6 months, I think something that has been really invigorating to me has been all the collective action that we're seeing, right? So it's collective action that people, meaning everybody from individuals to organizations, are coming together around the world to create community and action around those global threats to humanity, whether that's climate change, global pollution, global biodiversity loss. And I think the other cool thing is things aren't siloed anymore, right? It's not sort of one or the other. Groups are talking about these things together. So like real concrete examples that made me incredibly hopeful was back in September when there were over 200 medical journals that got together and published the same editorial about calling on global leaders to take action for climate change and promote health, right? And that was the first time that something like that happened, where the same editorial was published at the same time. And I think that shows two things. One is the severity of the issue, so we got to pay attention. But two, just the consensus around the need to take action. So that kind of bolsters me, right? When I say, okay, I'm not the only one, and why am I thinking these things? Like, okay, it's really happening. And it's happening in other dimensions too, like around global biodiversity loss. There's a big initiative around, it's called groups that are looking to create a more equitable future that include nature positive, net zero emission groups. And again, what I love is this, it's more of a systems thinking, right? Around, it's not just one topic or another, but it's bringing them together and saying, look, we're part of this planet. We're altering this planet. We need this planet to survive, right? And so that really gives me hope. So it's exciting to see, but it also gives me hope for the future. Yeah.
And I love that you almost, I heard you, we need the planet. So often we hear the planet needs us. We have to do this. And it's like, well, actually the planet will probably be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually us. It's the people.
Right. Well, exactly. And so that also brings me to think about like other collective action. And I know at ecoAmerica, you have the Momentous initiative and program. And so what are you seeing about people coming together, taking charge and saying, we need to do something?
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that question. And I love the tables are turning. The interviewer becomes the interviewee. So yeah, no, thanks so much for asking about the Momentous initiative. We, so Momentous spelled moment, us, our moment for climate action. It's really based on, it's a commitment. It's a sign on. You can sign on to the statement. And I think Jess put the link in the chat, but it's also a commitment. We are committing to these three pillars: ambition, restoration, and justice. We know we need to do more now. So we need to have carbon emissions each decade going forward. We need to restore thriving nature, and we need to center equity in climate solutions. And so that's the momentous pledge, right? And so you can sign on right now. If you check out the ecoAmerica site, you'll see all the charter signatories. We've had civic leaders, health leaders, faith leaders, sign on to this statement. And then each of us is committing to each of the things that's in the statement. We're very effective advocates when we can walk the walk too, right? So, and we did a summer campaign where we had folks call in to their elected representatives and submit LTEs to their local paper to really spur that local action as well. So I really appreciate talking about momentous here. I love the collective action that we're seeing all over. And so Melody, what for you has been an action that sticks out that is a highlight for you?
Yeah, I think it's really great to see how people from all different sectors and also both in planetary health and climate health courses and majors in my university have also come together, and also just seen in talking with other Planetary Health Alliance campus ambassadors, the ways in which they've really tried to transform their own university curricula, whether they're in public health or in medical school or grad school. And these efforts really to foster climate and planetary health awareness in individuals, and no matter what the field or line of work they might pursue, has really been significant. Some of my co-planetary health ambassadors or peers, I guess, have written together an article called Planetary Health: Young Academics Ask Universities to Act. I thought it was a really great article and highly recommend checking it out. And it provides a really great roadmap for students to take action within their universities to request climate and planetary health education and action. And I think it also has made me think a lot about the ways in which I look and seek courses, and the ways in which even in my most basic curricula, there are integration of aspects to think about sustainability and climate change, but also the impacts it will have on health.
Yeah, I so appreciate the way that these issues have been woven into curriculum, because education is a really important first step, right? And we see that once people understand these ideas, they accelerate to action. And so I think that's great. And there's been movement when you talked about integrating into curriculum and your coursework. It made me think about there are professional associations who are making it part of continuing education as well. So folks maybe who didn't get that training initially are getting it as continuing education. And I think the American Academy of Pediatrics put out some papers recently and is integrating some climate education into their continuing education model. So that's really important. And I was listening to a talk earlier today about, is environmental justice. So is teaching about environmental justice enough, or is there more that's required? And that's your thoughts also made me think about that discussion I was listening to earlier. And feel free to chime in. I meant that as sort of a general question, but if you have any thoughts about sort of education is a critical first step, I think everybody would agree. And what's the next step for you? Like, what else are you seeing on your campus, for example, where people are engaging in action?
Yeah, I think at school, even for the career fair, for example, what a lot of students are asking for now are for like specific rubrics that the company has to fill out, tell us how much you're contributing in terms of greenhouse gases, but also emissions. What are ways in which we can see what your climate plan is if you have one. And a lot of students are asking for that, and the Environmental Solutions Initiative and other groups on campus that really focus on sustainability, not just at MIT, are now asking companies that come to recruit MIT students what their climate pledges are, what are they really actually looking to do, and so that students also have a good idea when they're going to look for companies to get hired, that's also in mind as well.
Wow, I love that.
I love that. Do it. And I think that's also really exciting for me, maybe as an older person, if you will. I just love that the younger generations are just being super active, right? And they're asking really good questions. Yep. And they're, sort of no nonsense. And it's like, look, this is it's your future, it's our future, it's our children's future, it's our children's children's future. So let's talk about this. And what are you doing, right? So I think that's really brilliant. So yeah, thanks for bringing that in, Melody. That was great.
It's a great tangible for everybody, anyone who's listening. If you're applying for a job or an internship, it's a great question to ask, your potential employer. And I think, holding your employer accountable for these, I think that's really brilliant. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that sort of individual or local action. A lot of the announcements that we talked about in that first question were global or national in scale, but we do know that every person every day can make a difference on climate change and planetary health and can be part of the solutions. So we've started talking about that a little bit, but let's dig in some more. What does your everyday climate or planetary health action look like? And Melody, do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, sure. So I think that it's been mentioned, but I'm part of the Planetary Health Alliance's Planetary Health Campus Ambassador program. So that's been really a pretty important part of my everyday action. Joining the ambassadors program has really exposed me to all sorts of really amazing young activists in their own right in their universities. And a lot of what I do also revolves around school-based action in that respect. But one particular example that I'll throw or mention is a group of Planetary Health Campus Ambassadors, and I'm part of this group, got together last year to collaborate on a Planetary Health Children's ABC storybook. So we can throw a link in the group chat to give you a preview of what we have so far, but really writing and reflecting has been an integral part of that as well. Beyond creating this book, which kind of was spun out of the pandemic and out of this really increasing call to really think about how do we educate the next generation and prepare people for planetary health and the impact that climate already has had on human health, but also what are ways to reflect on it and engage children in the conversation, but also other people in the public. And so there's a PHA blog on Medium, and that's been an outlet of writing for many Planetary Health Alliance campus ambassadors. We also created a Planetary Health Case Study Club. So the Planetary Health Alliance has a really amazing set of case studies and an anthology kind of about these different examples of ways in which the environment really ties in very closely with human health, but for specific communities and how they overcome these challenges and solutions. And then there's also a ton of research out there currently about eco-anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues related to climate change and the ways in which it's impacting us as a younger generation, but also people in general in terms of thinking about how we're able to combat this and combat the feeling of hopelessness that people have really seen, especially with the pandemic, but then also just in general, so that people can become involved and take action. But yeah, all of that kind of has spurred in different ways, and I've really brought together the ambassador program and other people into really looking for action and inspired all these different initiatives, really. Yeah,
That's great. And I really saw the thread of storytelling woven through your answer there, whether it's a storybook for kids, which is great. I know our partners at the American Public Health Association have eco bookworms club. So this, when it's ready, might be a good eco bookworm story. But then also those case studies, I can't tell you how often people are asking for case studies, right? Whether it's for academic literature or for more informal or gray literature, just telling stories in newspapers and things like that. We need the data paired with that storytelling. There was actually a StoryCorps recently, a StoryCorps series on climate and health. And I think that makes a difference, because Marie, something you said earlier about not feeling alone, right, in your concern. And that, I think that storytelling really brings it home for people. And so, so Marie, what does your everyday climate and planetary health action look like?
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, there's so many things firing off in my brain right now, like, that importance of community and not feeling alone. And I think also that piece that Melody was getting to too, that you can feel this mental health issues around depression, hopelessness, but one way to combat that is to take action with others, right? So that's pretty great. Yeah, I definitely reflect on, try to, on the everyday piece, reflect on what is it that, how I live my life, and what are those things that I can more or less control. And those things even boil down for me to things like the foods I eat or the modes of transportation I take, right? And so, but I think there are a couple of things that came to mind when I was just thinking about this. One is it taking time to reflect, and Melody mentioned this too. You know, we're just in such a go situation all the time that we can have, we may not stop to say, is this okay what I'm doing, or do I have a choice? So taking a little bit of time for yourself to reflect and ask yourself those questions, like, do I really need to drive today, or can I, you know, I have to leave a little bit earlier, but I could take public transportation or whatever that is. Yeah. And so, and I also want to say that when I think about those choices, sometimes I really like to hone in on it not being as if I'm losing something, right? I want to think, when I think of those choices, I want to think, what are those benefits that might even go beyond me? So an example might be like in terms of the planetary health diet, right? Which is where sort of half your plate is veggies, the other half is really whole grains and plant-based proteins. And if you want maybe some, you know, meat and dairy or whatever. But when you think about that, you think, it's yummy, so I'm not missing out on anything there. But B, it's also, it's much more ecosystem friendly. Like when we talk about water use or land conversion, it lowers my personal carbon footprint. So that's good, right? That's something that I'm always trying to do. And then it has all these personal health benefits, right? Like reduced cardiovascular disease or incident of that, potentially reduced type 2 diabetes issues or other health issues. So it's not only me, right, that's benefiting from this, but hopefully the planet and my community and society at large. So, and ultimately, when I think about that, Rebecca, like that makes me happier. Like I'm happy about that. And yay, I mean, who doesn't really want to be happy, especially with all the news we have around us. And so when I feel like I take those small steps, I'm like, hey, all right. And, you know, I'm walking more if I'm not driving, and that feels good. And so anyway, what about you, Rebecca? What's your everyday look like?
Keep turning the tables.
I know, we're just on this merry-go-round.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, especially that last point. You know, I during the pandemic, I've said this before, but during the pandemic is when I started composting. It's something that I didn't think I could do. I didn't have enough time for. We've since moved to a house, but we were living in a condo, so like we didn't have a garden. So I didn't know, you know, what like and I always felt guilty about it. And we also kind of have to shed some climate guilt sometimes because you know, we need to do as much as we can, all that we can, as much as we can. But sometimes, you know, we can't let those choices overwhelm, you know, or
Yeah.
you know. So I think it's okay sometimes to let go of some climate guilt and do the best we can every day. And if everybody did that, we'd be in a better place. But I think so. Composting is one, and you know what? I feel pretty darn good about it, and that feels pretty darn good. And all I did, I took a bucket. I did not purchase any fancy thing. I got a bucket out of the closet and I started putting coffee grounds, banana peels. And at the time, again, I was living in Washington, D.C., and I went to my regular farmer's market and dropped off my compost. And
That's
so
pretty
earlier
cool.
you mentioned systemic change. We need to make sure that we have the systems in place so that everybody can access solutions. And
Right.
that was a great example where, as someone who living in a condo in a city, I didn't think I could I just didn't think I could do it. And I thought it'd be harder. It is one of the easiest things that I feel good about. And, you know, as a household, we then have less than one bag of trash per week.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, feels good. And so I think that's part of my everyday. And again, you know, public transit, but, you know, calling my legislator. So having meetings. So I live in Maryland. The Maryland legislative session is 90 days. It happens from January to April. Everybody's, and this is for the US, but everybody's state legislature is going to be a little bit different. Find out, when is your legislative session? Who is your elected official? Not necessarily in Washington, D.C., but in your state capital, and call them and ask them, hey, what, like, I care about climate. I care about climate because it's climate solutions will improve my health. And
Yeah.
so, how can I help you? Well, what are you doing on this and how can I help you? And I think, if you called your local elected officials to ask them that can make a huge difference and get to that systemic change. So a lot of my everyday stuff looks like that too. Tweet your legislator. Every elected official now has social media. Let them know you care. They need to hear from you. That's the only way they know you care.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of my everyday stuff, is some personal action on my part, and talking about it, especially with decision makers.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I also have to say that I can see that the chat is alive with lots of good resources. So if people haven't been looking at the chat, I'd say go there. There's some great links that are being dropped in there. So terrific.
Yeah, and I see a bunch of so you guys have campus ambassadors, and I see a bunch of our Climate for Health ambassadors on the chat as well. So shout out to the Climate for Health Ambassador program. We just launched a learning management system, so you can take the training to become an ambassador on demand anytime. Check it out, join the community. And they're just doing awesome things. Just saying, a senator called back today after my email to them last Thursday. So awesome job, Debbie. Thanks for sharing that. And I believe Debbie is also hosting a book club on our mental health and climate change report coming up. And so our ambassadors are really doing creative things like that, and talking about that, talking about these issues with others in their community. So shout out to campus ambassadors, shout out to Climate for Health ambassadors. Thanks for all that you're doing. We actually did get a question from the audience that takes us back a little bit. We started to touch on offices and workplaces. So interviewing, during an interview, asking what are you doing to reduce your carbon footprint? But Thomas asked, what can we do in our offices and workplaces to advance a planetary health view? So if you think about your workplace, so maybe Marie, you want to start?
Sure, I'll jump in. And Thomas, thank you for that question. That's a great question. And also, I think, it's probably sort of three things. One is having that planetary health view to begin with, which is fabulous, right? That's starting, or that climate health view, and which they're really quite synonymous, really. It's just, so it's thinking about, okay, so what are all the actions that happen in my office, from everywhere from supply chain to in the office, actually what's going on, and are there like equitable, are there good systems in place for conversations where all voices can be heard and respected, and then all the way to the end of life product, right? So what are we disposing of? How much? Where is it going? That kind of thing. So you have to look at that whole trajectory. And when you do that with a planetary health lens, you want to be saying, okay, so what are the human health impacts or benefits of each of those decisions that we're making, and then how is that connected to the environment and social justice? So, that's sort of the lens you need to look at your I'd say business operations with, and so that's just a step number one. The second step, it really is, engaging with your peers and your colleagues throughout, and we've talked about this just in this session as well, that it's creating awareness, right? So not everybody may know what planetary health or climate and health means. And so how do you educate them as well and create awareness? But also you want to bring them into the collective decision-making, because ultimately, all of this stuff that we're doing, especially for what we call the great transition, which is like how we do just about everything differently, is brand new, right? So we need all hands on deck. We need all minds on deck to think about, okay, specifically for my company, what can we do together, right? How can we change our procurement systems, or how can we have a better, more equitable work environment, and that kind of thing. But the other thing that maybe you can even think about is, again, and this gets back, Rebecca, to what you just were talking about, is some of the work that you do, depending upon your workplace and what it is we might need to call to lobby for changes in regulations or subsidies or something so that businesses can do the right thing, right? So sometimes they're sort of hampered by the legislation and regulatory system that might be outdated. And so you might have to say, you know what, we need that systemic change. So we're going to have to say, okay, this is the problem, and then work with our legislators or whoever it is to make that change. And then the other piece is just, if you're there, if you think that your company is interested in this, there are these calls to action like that we started talking about at the top of the hour. Whether one is on the nature positive net zero emission call to action that's being run, and I know we'll drop that into the chat. That's something that they're really looking for companies and organizations to sign on by January, because there's a big conference of parties and biodiversity that's happening. And so getting this collective action from businesses behind that is really important. There's also the Sao Paulo Declaration for Planetary Health, for example, which individuals and organizations can sign on to. And that's just that's something that looks across 19 sectors of society, whether it's businesses, artists, journalists and media, or spiritual leaders. And that gives you guidelines, right? So you could maybe use that as a bit of a roadmap. And I think also I want to have us drop in the chat another paper, which is a great conversation starter. It's by some German colleagues, which is called Planetary Health, What We Need to Talk About. And so it frames like all these planetary health solutions, or not solutions, but challenges. And then it really asks questions. And these are things that you could just take right into your office and say, you know what, I just think we should read this. And it's like 3 pages, right? It's 10 bullet points, if you will. And it just centers, again, climate and planetary health, and says, okay, this is how we start to take the next steps. And I know, Rebecca, ecoAmerica, Climate for Health, you have a lot of action pages yourselves, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we actually do have one on workplace. So our first set of action sheets focused on, what can we do in our homes, our communities, our workplaces, and with policymakers. So we do have, and it's what you need to know, what you need to do. And then we also have our Climate for Health Moving Forward guide, which has in there a roadmap to maybe how you could have this conversation in the office. And so sometimes these can seem like really big issues, and you need that stepwise approach. And hopefully the Moving Forward guide can help with that. But Melody, what do you think offices can do, or sort of what are you looking for your employer?
Yeah, I mean, definitely having a plan in place already, thinking about being able to even see that. Not all companies have that already. Even having a plan in place that provides an understanding of like what is the breakdown, what is the plan for the next 10 years. Definitely something to keep in mind. I think in my university, usually it's finding places where there's already conversations occurring and starting that conversation and continuing it, and how to actually broaden that scope of climate change and climate conversations, to add this kind of human health lens to it, which often kind of actually gets ignored or is separated from like the environmental health context. And so really bringing that planetary health view or lens to it, and helping with those conversations and really broaden their focus too, and expanding the frame further perhaps, is one way in which I find like being able to take these steps further, to push how we think about the impact of anthropogenic climate change on human health, but also on the planet, and really what does that look like, and how to bring these other lenses to look at the problem and the scope of the problem, and really kind of increasing the discussion in that respect. In my university, at least that's kind of how I see it happening.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up on that, and I guess getting back to Thomas's question, when I was saying also, it might sound a bit scary in a sense to maybe sign this call to action or step out there, but I think when you do that, you're finding the community again, right? So, and you'd stay in touch with people who are like-minded in terms of wanting to figure this out, right? And then they could have some best practices as well. And just what I can tell you is, we even work with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and we're working with a number of businesses there who are trying to figure out how to operationalize planetary health in their workplace. But this is cutting edge stuff. So I think it's really important to stick with the community, if you will, or get yourself attached with the community, and just know that we don't have all the answers. And so we need, as I said, all hands and all brains on deck, because we need to figure this out collectively.
Yeah, for sure. And we got a question in the chat about how responsive universities are to making substantial changes. So Melody, what's been your experience on campus when you are having these conversations? Are they with the administration, or is it more with other students? Sort of like how responsive is the university, sort of the system itself?
Yeah, I definitely think that students have been requesting more and more pushes for change. And more recently, there was like a sustainability and climate council kind of created of students and professors and other staff and the administration to really think about how MIT is going to develop its next climate plan and what does that entail and all those aspects. So I think in that respect, not only as responsive, I think the students have been asking for this for several years now, but responsive in the sense that after all these years of asking, they're actually making these changes, and their students becoming more increasingly involved in how MIT thinks about the scope of its plan for the next coming years and what does that really look like. And I think that's really something that the students have really been pushing for and has slowly come around.
Yeah, and I'm just going to jump in again because Rebecca, you can't stop me. Well, you can, officially you can, but you've got me going here on these thoughts. I know a couple of universities, and there are probably many, many more, but for example, Victoria University in Australia and University of Minnesota and a couple others who are seriously trying to what we call operationalize planetary health. And so that means, again, everything from their procurement, but also how they design their spaces to make sure that everyone's comfortable coming into those spaces, as well as the curriculum. So how do you get this curriculum in as foundational curriculum for everyone, no matter what track you're on, and then also like, what are those outcomes like? So in terms of the courses that you teach, are you setting students up well to enter society and deal with these new challenges? So it's pretty cool. And I think that gets back to the case study, why case studies are so powerful, because we don't have these roadmaps. But so if you can see like how a couple of universities have gone about that, then you're like, oh, okay, at least I've got an idea about it now. So.
Yeah, for sure. And that was my experience in undergrad as well, let's just say several years ago. I actually was pretty active in my campus Hillel, and I did Birthright. I went to Israel, and that was the first time I saw dual flushing toilets. And I was like, what a neat water conservation, technique. And I came back to campus, and we were rebuilding, they were, building a new Hillel building. And I said, okay, we have to have dual flushing toilets, because this was in Israel. It was the first time I had seen it. Water conservation is a really big deal in Israel. And I thought that would be a great learning opportunity for Hillel, students engaged in Hillel. And they were so responsive and accepting. And, that's a complicated, it's facilities management. It's the donors of the building. It's the, campus. And everybody was like, that's a great connection. And there's dual flushing toilets in the Hillel building, now, and now I think they're more ubiquitous, but they were more of a novelty in the US, I think at that time. And I just remember a really positive experience. You have an idea, you bring it to the administration, and I don't know that that's true everywhere, but certainly my experience, it sounds like it's many others. And so if you have that idea, bring it forward. It might very well come to fruition. Melody, I want to pick up on something you said earlier about those conversations about, finding where those conversations are happening and furthering them. And we know people care about climate change. Overwhelming majorities of Americans say that they do, but we also know that only about 6% say they talk about it at least once a week, and it's only 19% who talk about it once a month. So let's talk climate, which is why we're here. Melody, when you're in those spaces, what's your go-to climate conversation starter?
Yeah, this is hard. I think, especially talking about it at home even is sometimes difficult. I have a younger sister, and so we often like to talk about ways in which we can think about how we approach our conversations. But often I really like to think about what other people imagine as their future. Like, what kind of future do you imagine where we have hopefully sustainably met our goals? And when it comes to climate change, I think a lot of really good podcasts that I like often go into this as well. One of my more favorite podcasts recently, called How to Save a Planet, is a really good podcast that kind of helps with thinking about how to start that conversation around climate, but also climate change and other aspects of it as well. But yeah, really what I like to ask people is, like, what kind of future do you imagine? Like, where do we all fit in that picture when you think about it? Yeah.
Yeah, Marie, what's your go-to? What's your favorite climate conversation starter?
You know what? So I guess I might fail at this question because I don't have, like, I've decided after trying several times to figure this out, is like, I sort of have to go to where a person is, like, what are their interests? Because I feel like it's too much of a heavy lift to, like, bring them over to, like, sort of where my mindset is. And so I'm like, so whatever might be of interest to them, whether it's weather or natural the environment, or the loss of, like, gosh, I'm not seeing as many birds, or whatever it might be, like, and those might seem a little bit trivial, but it's just by way of example to say those are great entry points, because that's something that they already care about. And then try to pick up the conversation from there. Also, like, it's a great way because you can start by agreeing with them. You're like, yeah, man, the weather is kind of nuts, right? Like, what's going on with all this rain, or these droughts, or these floods, or, and you agree with them. And then, so that's already sort of putting you in a good place to have a conversation. But then you can sort of segue into, like, yeah, so, I guess what's causing that? Or, you can go into whatever sort of angle you want to, but I think in part it's trying to find what they're interested in and pick up on that thread. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great one. And then I think I love Melody asking sort of what future do you envision?
Yeah.
I might try that out, see how that works. But then I think for me, health. I say, I care about climate solutions. I care about climate change because it impacts our health. And I think sometimes, there's just little tidbits, factoids that I can kind of, at this point rattle off that reflect some storytelling that people just haven't heard about. And that kind of goes, Melody, like you were saying, sometimes that climate health connection isn't as clear for folks. They care about health. And that's, it's a great way to connect with people on climate solutions. I have found myself talking more and more about the impacts climate change, heat and air pollution are having on pregnancy outcomes. Mm-hmm. And people are taken aback. They didn't know, but it makes sense. It's inherently because people know, stress is bad. Or if I'm talking to a person who was previously pregnant, they're like, yep, I could totally get that, how being really, a lot of heat and air pollution, that can be really bad. That's exhausting and adds stress to the body, which is bad for the baby. So I think, talking about those direct connections to our health that people can relate to has been an effective conversation starter. I think I remember talking to an elected official about this, who I went in and just started talking, that person asked me about climate change. I was in there for something else and they asked me about climate change. Like, now that I have you here, actually, let me ask you about this. And I started talking about, being concerned about the spread of vector-borne disease, seeing mosquitoes in new places, seeing ticks in new places. And, I could see this person's face completely change from I got to know about this because some of my constituents care, but I don't know that I really care, to, I didn't think about it that way before.
Mhm.
And now I think I might care. It was a transformation that I saw that was very meaningful. And it was just because I was talking about it in a health context.
Mhm.
And no one that had come into this person's office before had talked about it in a health context. And so health, right? That's my shtick. I'm sticking to it, and it's working. So climate and health is my conversation starter. So I, okay, it's a good question. Along with opening conversations, what suggestions do you make for them taking action? So sort of if you're talking to someone and they say, maybe they're with you, right? And they say, well, what can I do about it? What's your answer to that? Melody, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think in terms of like opening conversations and specific actions, I mean, I think you already mentioned several that were like really great for the workplace, but also talking to your legislators. I think taking action can be as simple as thinking about, like, I think Mary mentioned earlier, your diet and how you can reframe that. Others that I've known, especially during the pandemic when everyone was at home, besides getting into composting, people also got into gardening a lot. People really thought about how am I going about my daily life even, and the various aspects in which I might be able to live more sustainably, but also live also more happily in that respect as well. And I think there's so many different ways to take action, even at home, that we often forget about, that I think during the pandemic really called us to focus into thinking about that. But there's still so many other ways to kind of continue to take political action as well, when we're talking about really reaching out to legislators, but also people in my university, for example, and talking to people who have administrative power in the university as well, and even in your own workplace, for example, could possibly be another action as well. But yeah, I think the list goes on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Alana, for the question. And Darcy says that book clubs, I often suggest that books will help start this conversation. There's a lot of great climate and planetary health literature out there now, in terms of, you could have a journal club if it's a more academic setting, right? We've put some great articles in the chat, or more of a storytelling, or fiction. There's fiction out there that weaves in climate and planetary health. So that's a great suggestion. Marie, what's your action starter?
Yeah, it's all of those things. So I think just building on that, and I think also just thinking about, I mean, because we do need sort of systemic change at all levels. So if you're in a community and you yourself are like on the community board, or even on your school board or your church board or whatever, think about where you're situated again. So it doesn't have to be a super high lift sometimes, but where do you intersect with the possibility of being able to make change, right? So it's like adding the dual flush toilets or whatever. It's like, can we do something within our school or in our church or within our community that might change things, whether that's getting more electric charging stations for the parking lots, or if it's can we also think about like just consumption, right? Because this massive amount of consumption that's going on is really driving resource scarcity, pollution. It's off balance in terms of so many things. So like, do we really need to buy all this stuff, whatever this stuff is? And that can be done at both personal level, but also at a greater community level too, right? And in communities, I know in the community I'm in, they are able to have a lot of mostly green energy that they've switched over to, and or they have an option, as a consumer, that you can get that. And so I think it matters, but it also, we do absolutely have to send signals to those people who have power over the legislation and, are making these big changes about where finances are going, right? Yep. And where subsidies might be going and where, other decisions are being made. So I think all of that work is important.
Yeah, for sure. And I know I just have one final question for our conversation to wrap us up. And it's actually another audience question. So Molly asks how, and this is a great sort of note to end on. We've talked about the mental health and climate change. So how do you recommend staying motivated about climate change and planetary health when it seems, sometimes it can seem that our wins are few and far between? So Marie, do you want to start off?
Sure. Great question. Really great question. And I'd say find your allies, right? So we've been talking about that, whether it's through signing up for those calls to action, or whether it's finding somebody in your community, or right here, come back to ecoAmerica or Planetary Health Alliance and find your people, because it really is helpful. And I have to say that the people involved in these conversations and this work are some of the best people I come across, right? They're actually positive, right? They're thinking toward the future and trying to make a difference. So that's really good. And I also think that, humans are incredibly creative. So if we can channel our creativity and energy into making change, we can do it. We can do it. And so I feel positive, and that's sort of what I work for every day. It's like, I know we can do this. I know we can do this. It's huge. It's monumental. There's so much that needs to be changed, but we can do it. So that just keeps me positive. Melody, how about you?
Yeah, I think knowing that there's allies like you out there is definitely one great way to stay motivated. I think it's really hard, but knowing you're not alone and goes a long way. And so starting really small by finding other people there to support, and also to start all these really cool initiatives, or really start that having those conversations. Finding people who are your allies is one really big step, but it can go a long way.
Yeah, for sure. I think those are brilliant answers to end on. And so I want to thank you, Marie and Melody, for joining us as our guests on Let's Talk Climate. Thank you to the Planetary Health Alliance for co-hosting this episode. We are grateful for everything you shared here and for your ongoing work to act on climate for planetary health. We're at the end of our time here today, but I know you have inspired our listeners to be bold and prioritize climate solutions to improve our health and our families' health. For all of our listeners, please click on the link to the survey when this webcast ends to provide your feedback. If you're watching this on YouTube, check out the description below to let us know what you think. Engage with us online with the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and be sure to subscribe and follow us for the latest thought leadership, resources, and episodes on climate action and advocacy. From all of us at ecoAmerica and Climate for Health and the Planetary Health Alliance, thank you. Please join me in caring for our climate in order to care for our health. Stay well, stay safe, and get active.